You are never done with family. So often, and this is one reason why it's so important to think strategically, like think explicitly about improvement, right? And if you read Joy on Purpose, to actually come up with a life plan. To ask yourself if, my sons here are named Thomas and Luke, and on a regular basis, I think, what more can I do for Thomas and Luke? And I think in high detail about who they are and their lives and where they are and where I am and everything else, right? We get into trouble when we act like, for those of us who serve LDS missions, if you treat your family like a bus contact, you're going to feel like you got hit by a bus. Like that's a very bad idea, right? You don't have 5 seconds. You have forever, or at least the span of time that they're in your life. And even if they don't even want to talk to you anymore, you're still not done. You're in the flesh. You have the opportunity to intercede for them in ways that you cannot do when you're not here. It comes back to this world being specifically designed as a place where you can have faith. You can do things here that you can't do there. I've said this before, but people get excited about the idea of heavenly angels coming down from heaven, and I don't blame them, and ministering to them. But at least in many ways, if not to a greater extent, mortal messengers can do things that heavenly beings cannot. Because we're operating in the flesh and through the veil of faith. God does everything he does through what? Faith. It says that right in the scriptures, right? So if we're in a place where the greatest quantity of faith can be exercised, we have the potential to do things that can't be done in heaven. We're mixed up here. Do you realize this? However you want to categorize people, let's say that there are 3 categories of people. Do you know who's in which category? Do you know that those 3 categories of people cannot interact in heaven in any way like this? Have you read the Old Testament and looked at the progression of the interaction between Moses and the children of Israel through time? They're all chummy in the beginning. But there was a separation that occurred. And they couldn't interact as much. And then there were elders between them. In a family, I saw on social media, on Twitter the other day, there was a guy, and he said, look, I'm a newly converted Christian. I'm all about it. My wife doesn't want anything to do with it. My kids don't want anything to do with it. I'm just distraught because I feel like I can't have all these wonderful things to share with them. And I'm so, all about what I've found, but I can't share it with these people that I love. I don't remember how many characters were limited to now on Twitter, but I tried to tell him, you think that that's a bad thing. You have no idea that blessing is actually greater than being evenly yoked. You came here to suffer for that person in interacting with them and serving them in ways that you can't do there. You can't. Why? Because there it's like when this shining angel shows up and everybody just kind of melts and can't do anything. Right? But we can argue. I can argue for weeks with somebody if I wanted to. I can help them exercise faith. Or if their conscience isn't working properly, I can spin it up and help them feel guilty about something. And not only that, I can do it strategically. And, I'll flip it around so I don't get in trouble. If my wife knows I have some issue with something and I need to be better in this way, she can play the long game. She doesn't have to just explode and say you gotta change this right now, I can't, right? She can play the long game. What a blessing. Don't think that divine intervention is like this sanctimonious thing all the time. It can be. But how much greater is to use the opportunity that we have here? Imagine if you're a soldier and you're just like, if I'm not Napoleon Bonaparte himself, I'm useless. No, man, if you're a soldier and your job is to fire that rifle in that direction, operate in your lane. That's why you were placed there. To be a good soldier, you do what you do in your spot. Now, in this, you might say, okay, so I feel like there are like 20 different vectors here that I can work on in my situation. And it's like checking fishing traps or something. You're not going to check lobster traps all day long, the same trap, pull it in, throw it out, pull it in. You go check it every once in a while, and you're poking and prodding in your family, and you're like, well, I got to help him with this and help her with that. And okay. So you say, but that doesn't take up my full schedule. Great! Go see what else you can do. It's like that old story where the soldiers come to the general and they say, sir, I've got terrible news. We're surrounded. The general's like, great. What are you talking about? It means anything we do, we can attack the enemy. Right? I had a conversation with the father a few days ago, actually, maybe a week ago, and he said, Rob, I know this guy rather well. We talked for years, we're friends. He said, I feel terrible admitting this, but I feel like my role in my family is kind of at a dead end. I've got some kids coming out of the house now, and I've worked really hard. I support them all financially, I do everything I can think of, but I just feel like I still don't have the meaning in life that I want. I feel like I need to do more, not for me, but like I'm not doing my job if I'm not doing more. And I said, think of your family as this circle. There's a tiny slice of this circle that you're not seeing clearly, and it's small. And you're looking at all the stuff that we think of when we think about family duties in your role. That slice that seems small, it goes on forever. There's no limit to what you can plug into that. The meaning that you're looking for is in the depths of that tiny slice. And I said, pour your heart and soul into that, and you'll find the meaning that you're looking for. We are created in the image of God, and we have no idea what that means. If I gave you a rock, and I said, I want you to make this rock the best rock it can be, right? Most of us, including myself, would be like, yeah, it's already there. I have no idea what to do with this, right? Some sculptor might do something amazing with it, but then even then, they're going to be like, okay, I don't know what else to do with this. A mason might say, like, it belongs here in this brick wall, and we're good. Or stone wall, I guess. What about a tree? Well, a fruit tree. Well, you can plant it, it's in a good place, you can fertilize the ground, you can prune the tree, but there's only so much you can do with it. It's alive, but there's only so much you can do with it. It just takes a little bit of resources to check in with. What's the limit of a human? When are you done with a person? You're not. When you start living your life with your whole soul, you're going to find that the meaning that you currently experience collapses. More correctly, it's going to consolidate. It's going to consolidate into very few people and things. The reason the rest of it collapses is you're going to see, very quickly you're going to cross the line where it doesn't make sense to put more into it, because there's no value there for the cost. Humans can absorb any amount of love. We're the only things in all of creation that can. And this is one of the definitions of being created in the image of God. Because God can give forever, and we can receive forever. And so, coming back to the talk, and tying it to your question specifically to wrap this up, open your mind to greater scales of time and domain, of situations. Sometimes the ability to pick up a certain situation one more time with calm and love, it seems like such a small thing. It might be the biggest thing in the universe. Don't know if that makes sense. You know, we wear masks as people, some of us more than others. And I think out of all the human relationships, the hardest place to hide is in your marriage. That's the one person who you cannot hide from, right? And I think that's probably more intentional and critical to the intent of marriage than we think about. What does it mean to forgive someone who's offended you 70 times 7?
Someone you're married to?
Yeah, and like if it's a stranger and you're thinking like, oh, well, I'm a good person because I forgive 70 times 70. It's like, wait, this person knows me. Like they really, really shouldn't be like this to me. With this thing, again, we're dealing with this again, right? Like you could go down that road in whatever your own personal situation is, right? What's that worth? And you might think, but I want traction. I want to get on the road and go 50 miles of progress. But everything is successive in the gospel. If that person can't get past the very thing, and you're the only one on this planet who's situated to help them get there, this is why it's so tragic when we enable each other in our marriages. If you're the one person who knows you know where the bodies are, right? You know where the receipts are. You should not let them get away with anything. And you should encourage them when the whole world's got them down more than anyone else. If anyone's going to do it, it needs to be you. Because the rest of the world thinks that this person's I said the bee's knees about the furniture. Bee's knees, right? Oh, this person's perfect or whatever. No. Right? No. Okay, so help them because you're the only one that sees it. And for the good stuff too. You might be the only one in the world that sees it. Right? And so what's that worth? Okay, sure, fine. Maybe you don't believe the same thing as you religiously. Great. Thank God that you're in a situation where knowing what you know, imagine what you could do for them. Even if they don't care a lick about what you believe. That's awesome. If they tolerate you being around, but even if they divorce you, you still have a connection to them. Even if you have a restraining order, you can still pray for them. Right? You can. And you can fast for them. What a blessing. I'm going to get in trouble. I don't want to say that. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Hey, so it seems like a pretty good idea that if we don't want any revelation, we should just not do the last thing God asks us to do.
That's the best way to do it. Yeah, but you're opening yourself up to receiving it in rougher ways.
True. Yeah, after the testimony of the prophets comes the testimony of fires. And
wonderful. Yes.
Well, it just seems like, when Nephi, he writes in, I think, 1 Nephi 8, or so, he's like, hey, at this point, my dad had done everything that God had asked him to do. And it's like the very next thing, boom, here's the Leahona. Here's a vision in the night where God gives him, here's the next step, So you said the gospel's kind of successive.
It's absolutely successive.
And so it's like, at any point, if we could ever clear our conscience and say, I have done everything God's commanded me to do, it seems to be true that we can expect God will speak to us. Maybe not with a physical voice, but in some way, the next step is going to show up. This is what I want you to do next.
Yes.
And so, it really was compelling what you said towards the beginning about we're looking for some like big like revelation or whatever, where probably the thing that's stopping each one of us is like, oh, like I need to play less video games or something, you know, like some stupid mundane thing. You're like, oh, I need to like clean my room. You know, it's like whatever thing.
Look, you're absolutely right. And the thing to remember is what we don't know is not limited to factual content. It's also a limitation of value. I don't know if that makes sense. Like you said, some stupid thing like video games. What if that has some astronomically important impact in your life? One time I went to airborne school in the Army, and it's a long story, but to make it short, I really didn't want to go. And I prayed about the reasons for and against, cost and benefit, and I felt like I needed to go. I was actually quite confident that I needed to go. And I had a terrible time. I had all these trials while I was there, and some positive spiritual experiences too, but at the end of it, I prayed and I said, Lord, I have no idea why you wanted me to go to this. I mean, some things happened, great. We'll fast forward a year, I don't remember how long, and I found myself on a P-Day in Chile, early in the mission, and like an idiot, I thought I was going to show off to the other elders by climbing this cable bridge in hand over handing and hanging for a picture. And I was like 20 feet, or I had to be 30 feet off the ground. And these were old school digital camera days. So the guy's like fiddling with the camera. I was like, man, hurry up. This is getting tired. So he takes a picture, and I go to get my feet back up around the cable, and I can't. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh boy, like, I'm an idiot. God save me from this, and I promise I'll never do something this stupid again. And I'm looking down, and everyone's starting to freak out. So I held on for as long as I could, but my hands were tearing apart and getting bloody and stuff. So I let go. There's all these rocks below me, big boulders. And I landed between two boulders and just instinctively did a parachute landing and fall. Where you train, you just fall again and again and again. And I bounced back up, and they're like, because I should have broken my legs. And I said, I get it. Because that was the reason. You don't know the reason. Yeah, the value is part of what we're missing. Very important to understand. If you have kids, you already know this. Like, have you looked at a picture from when your kids were young and you're looking, you're like, I remember all the money problems, I remember all the stress, I remember this, that, whatever. And that was, I thought, the worst time of my life at the time. My wife, she was trying to find a picture frame for one of my son's pieces of art. And she had taken one of these pictures from when they were all little, that phase of life. And they were sitting out by the frame. And I said, Nikki, what are you doing with that? She said, well, I just wanted to see if this fit. And I picked up the picture and I looked. And I said, this was the happiest time of my life. And I had no clue at the time. I said, please be very careful with this picture. Let's put it back in the frame. We get another frame. You don't know. You only understand value in retrospect.
So I had one more follow-up, which is, as you're talking about God, how Jesus would act in all areas. It's not about at church. It's about our entire life, our entire being, and interaction from morning to night. It's interesting because you made me think of where it says that this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the immortality and the eternal life of man. So if we're trying to be like God, then what would our work be? When Jesus said, my meat is to do the will of my Father. And at the end, in the end of John, when he's sitting there on the beach with the disciples, after they've been out and they've done the boat thing again and they're eating, and he's like, do you love me, Peter? And it disturbs him because he asks him up 3 times. He's like, hello, of course.
It's worse than that. Because does he say Peter?
Simon Peter.
He says Simon. Jesus is, during his ministry, he calls him Peter. He describes him as a person he isn't yet. And after the betrayal, the denial, let's be safer. Because frankly, I think if the world were like Peter, we'd be in much better shape. After the denial. He doesn't just ask him a billion times, do you love me? Do you feed my sheep? He calls him Simon. He's saying, do you want to be Peter? Or do you want to be Simon? Because you're not Peter. Yeah. Heavy, huh? Yeah.
So knowing you, you're probably going to answer this in a way that frames the question I should have asked, but I'm pretty sure all or most of the people in this room know that we are in what you could call the last days or the end times, and right now it's relatively calm, but there will come a point where there's a drop, I guess. And based on if that is in 5 months or 5 years or 10 years or 30 years, the way that I live right now would probably be different if I had an actual knowledge of when that would happen. Do you have any insight on that? That's something that gives me stress, and I'm sure it gives other people stress.
So, actually, the Lord asked me that question a couple of weeks ago. He said, if I told you that, so I think about this in gradations because collapse is a ramp with spikes, right? It's like sudden drop-offs, but a ramp. People think of collapse as all at once, and that's why they don't understand it. And actually, it's just layers and layers of trying to oversimplify things so that they're emotionally easier to contend with. We try to deny, it's kind of like stages of grief. But you try to deny something, and then when you can't deny it, you try to wrap it up much neater than it actually is. Like, oh, I want to get divorced from my spouse because I want to be done with it. You're never going to be done with it, right? So just let go of that. And maybe it's still the right thing to do, maybe not, but don't think that it's going to be turn it off because you can't, especially if you have kids. But even if not. So with collapse, it's like that, where you try to deny it, and then, okay, well, the next step is I want to pretend like it's an all at once. It's not going to be all at once. Some things happen all at once, but there's an awful lot of things. They're spread out in time, right? Maybe a very long time. That's something that really bothers people to think about. So that being said, one of the things that I like to think of is, that's really not the way to phrase it. One of the ways I tend to think about it is in terms of big ticket items. The cessation of the power grid is one of these things. So some people talk about the end of the world as we know it. That's not very descriptive, but let's just talk about the power grid dropping. So what if there was going to be a time when there would be no more power? Ever. And the Lord said, how would you act if you knew this was going to be in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or 10 years? Do you have a list of what you would do? And I said, no. And so I started thinking about that, and I made some lists. And then he said, if I told you this, who would listen? And I said, Lord, I don't know. I don't know if anybody would. My family would, but I don't know who else.
We'd be in Noah's situation. We'd be in Noah's situation. When's the rain coming?
Perhaps.
Correct. For
Yeah.
some.
Yes. Or anyone else. It doesn't, I don't matter here, okay? In this circumstance. So we believe what it says in Amos, that before God does things, he tells people. You know, I can't even get people to leave Amazon reviews. Serious. It's such a small thing. If someone spent 10 years of their life crawling through hell, to obtain things and to process it in a book, it seems like a small ask to spend 5 minutes or even an hour carefully thinking about how a book changed your life and putting up a review. Remember, the little things are the big things, and you're not going to do big things if you're not willing to do little things. I read the verse, right? Is it unreasonable to ask someone who says, this book has changed my life, could you write a blurb about how it changed your life and put it on Amazon? No, I'm good. Right?
Change it enough, I guess.
So I don't say this because I think that God's going to tell me this, or that if he did, I would want you to listen, or whatever. That's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying people who don't do reasonable things won't do bigger things. And it's ridiculous to walk around thinking, well, if the end of the world's going to happen, God's going to send a prophet to warn us. Well, if he does anytime soon, I'm telling you right now, people are toast. Because they won't listen. Because you don't listen to smaller things. I'm not saying you like you, but people don't listen to smaller things. They're absolutely exceptions. Like, I hope you're one of them, right? Not you, anyone here. Yes?
Isn't learning about these things a part of learning about reality?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
mean, and so people who don't want to know or don't want to find out or don't do any searching at all or don't want to listen to someone who has a different opinion on what they think the reality is, that causes you lack knowledge.
So one reaction, and again, stages of grief, I don't want to know about, that's never going to happen. That could never happen. Okay, well, you're making a case that it could, but I don't want to know about it. And then when you push a little further, it's like, well, then I would just rather die.
Yeah.
Don't you think that God put you here now for a reason? When we read in 4th Nephi, there are 2 generations at the beginning. It's the adults and the kids. And then there's several hundred years of whatever kind of paradise. Of those generations, who was the happiest?
First.
I'd say the latter.
Is either the adults or kids? Maybe we can agree with that. See, the kids didn't make all the mistakes. That's what separated them. And I won't go as far as to say that therefore they were happier. But if we combine the adults and the kids, they were happier than other generations. Why? There's no context. In the entire history of the world, there's one generation. I don't mean like Gen Z, Gen X, whatever. One collection of people, collection of generations, who know the fullness of temporal things and the fullness of spiritual things. There's only one. It's this one. Those who walk through the fire are the only generation who have the ingredients to the greatest happiness through all of creation. Because the ones that are born after don't have a comparison. Well, so if you walk through the fire, you definitely don't want to die before that. What about the people who don't get that far? So did they still have an excuse to say, I'd just rather die? Let's get back to Jeff's question and my answer. If God does all things through faith, if I didn't mention this here and now, but can you measure love? I'll just briefly teach you this. Can you measure love? You can. What's the ruler? The degree to which you're willing to suffer for another person. That's the measurement. That's how you measure love.
Greater love hath no man than this.
Against such there is no law.
Okay? So, who as a generation has the opportunity to suffer the most? We do. Joy comes commensurate with suffering. It's dependable. Now, does that mean that you're going to swing the other way? No. But you have the ingredients too. Even if you don't make it. Make it. That's your purpose in life. As a soldier of Christ, if my job is to jump on the razor wire and have other people use my body as a bridge, then praise Jesus. I'm on it. You know, it's, I hope not sacrilegious, but in the Batman movie with Bane, okay? But this is very pertinent. What generation has the literacy that we do? Not just in terms of reading and writing. All the movies we've seen. Now, a friend of mine who's not religious, but does believe that the world that things will collapse. We joke about how, you know, one day we'll all be sitting around campfires and our kids will think we're the greatest storytellers because we're going to be like, yeah, imagine a land far away, you know, a long time ago. And there's these lightsabers and Darth Vader, you know. And be like, wow, Dad, he's got the awesome stories, right? But these are a language and we can communicate very rich ideas with this. Right? So in that Batman movie, Bane's on the plane, which rhymes, that's nice, and he's got this crew that do this terrorist operation. And I'm sorry that this is kind of, you know, crude and whatever, but it's very relevant. I don't remember the details, but they kidnap a guy, but they want to make it look like the plane's coming down by accident. And so he needs one of his henchmen to take the guy's place. It's now become a suicide mission. Apparently the guy didn't get the memo. But all it takes is he touches his arm and he says, they'll be expecting a body, brother. And the guy's about to grab the rope to get off the plane and he just sits down. If we're that loyal to Jesus, what can he do with us? What can he do with one person who is unlimited in their willingness to serve? What can he do with two people? What could he do with a husband and wife who are that dedicated? I'm not saying he's going to take down planes and stuff, okay? But he's going to cut chains that enslave people. And it doesn't take many people to do that if they're that dedicated. Okay, but to be that dedicated, you can't have vast swaths of your life off limits, like police tape, Jesus do not cross, right? It won't work. Because it might be, you know, what if the whole thing about, I'm just going to, because you mentioned video games, what if the whole thing is that one day when you would be there with the controller, you're going to be on the street and you walk by this guy and he needs help and you're the only one. Or whatever. You never know. Or you get this job interview and your whole life changes because you were there. Our idea of value is just so wacky compared to God's. It's so far off. And it's part of the mystery is to fix that. To move further.
It's more of like a comment and I wouldn't say praise, just of acknowledgement of how you allowed my thinking great paradigm shift. I don't know what the video it was, but you mentioned something about the suffering of Christ tied into discipleship. And I didn't understand that. I didn't join the church until I was 31. I'll be 57 next month. And it's a strange place to be because I didn't understand that concept and what we're talking about, the depths of suffering. Holy shit. It is just so profound how we're speaking on different levels that speak so deeply to me. And I just want to thank you for that. It gives me a greater understanding that I understand what the hell it would be to be a disciple. And be careful what you pray for. Because when you have angels and when you hear God and God calls your name, you have to be accountable, my friends. And it's scary, but it's also liberating. Because I was not a good person. And for him to flip the script, as I say, or as he told me, it blows my mind. So I thank you for your wisdom that you share. And just God bless you, my friend.
I appreciate it, and it's him, not me. If it's good,
I understand that, but you're listening. And I appreciate that.
I'm responsible for the typos. Yeah. Angela?
I think I can speak for everyone in saying thank you. We thank God for all that you've done personally in your life to bring you to this point and to gather us in to be all at this point. And what do you see moving forward as a community? Are you going to be directing that through the website? And I know you've been very, very careful about moving forward regarding the community. So what are your thoughts on community?
I think it's a wonderful question after a talk on not looking beyond the mark. Look, it's funny to me, like I don't want to be standoffish when I answer this question, not your question, but it's come up on YouTube, it comes up. I say, what community? What community? I'm going to take this from a couple of different angles. A lot of people get excited about the idea of, again, a heavenly angel coming down and ministering to you, or the Lord himself. And as we've heard, you better be careful what you wish for. And I like to think of this, I call it prophet goggles instead of beer goggles. Like, people get really excited about this idea, but it's because they're using their current value to imagine what this other thing would be like. It is not like that. And if it were like that, you'd have it already. It's different. And it's different in ways that you're not going to like right now. Okay? So, part of the procession is to change what we value and by how much we value it. It's absolutely critical. And that's why I have been and will write and speak a lot about that. The good news is you don't have to believe other people if they want to tell you what's valuable. You, internally, this is D&C 50, very important. You internally are equipped to assess value. What other people can give you is evidence, ideas, but it's still up to you. And it has to be. And if you're doing it in another way, it's not right. So, there's one video, I know I talked about this, but it's probably a theme that's come up multiple times. In fact, in this talk, self is first. When you can stand up and say, I do everything I sincerely believe the Lord would in my place, and nothing I don't think he would. You're ready for the second gate, which is spouse. When you treat your spouse, which is, you'd say, well, how is that not true? Well, I'm saying working together under whatever constraints that spouse might impose, but you fill that up. The next step is kids. And we could talk about that for a very long time. But again, like, I already know no one's interested because no one wants to hear about how this affects your relationship with your kids. No one wants to hear about it, right? Very few. And then, it's not, hurrah, like, what? Send me the GPS coordinates. I'll bring my camper full of food storage. It doesn't work that way. You know what happens when you do it that way? Ask Joseph Smith. It can't work that way. Ask Moses. He took a whole nation. There's only one filter with the Israelites. Do you paint the door or not? Do you come or not? Against the backdrop of these miraculous, huge things. You know how it happens in the end times? It's through information. First. It's through information. It's already flowing. If you haven't noticed, then it's just underscoring what I'm saying. Right? And it's not information of, come on, come to my party, here's the coordinates, bring some hot dogs and tents. It's do this in your life. This is like, here's principles, have at it. Here's why you should do it, have at it. Now in your marriage, with your kids, in your community. Is Rob Smith going to start a church? No, but I'm going to tell each of you to do that. But I'm going to tell you what a church is. It's a community of people aligned towards Christ. You don't have to write it down. It's in the Book of Mormon. Just reread those parts about, and Alma, Mosiah, right? It has to be that way. And there's parts that have to happen before the fire burns the forest. And there are parts that can only happen after. You're early to the game. But it's not surplus early. It's, in the military, we call you ADVON, advanced party, the people who set up the place for everyone else to come. But the place isn't Zion, Big Z, GPS coordinate. It's,
Missouri.
what's that?
It's not Missouri.
Oh, I have friends in Missouri, and I said, I really wouldn't live there if I were you.
But that's the start here, my friend.
Yes,
Always. This is my church.
that's right.
Links with them. If I don't have that,
That's right. Yeah, well, there's so many little keys with this, right? But it's little clusters of people. It's clusters. I don't want you to come to my house. Please don't. I have stalkers sometimes. I had to call the police on a lady once. It's a true story. That's not the way it's going to work, right? Clusters of people it's firefly butts, people. Firefly butts is the key. Do you know what fireflies do? I'm sure I've ranted about this. Well, they seek a light brighter than their own. Make your light as bright as you can get it while looking for brighter light. It's that simple. Everything else will take care of itself.
Amen.
Yeah. What do you think is what do you think we most misunderstand about repentance or faith that keeps us from baptism of fire experience to hear the voice of the Lord in our day-to-day lives?
That's a really good question. Okay, so when I say sin, you probably think in terms of a white list and a black list. Can do this, don't do that. Right? What if I told you that it's much more powerful to think of it in terms of a rank order of net benefit? So instead of saying, do this, don't do that, well, what's that worth compared to all other possible options? This is an extraordinarily powerful tool. In other words, don't say, I have to stop doing whatever, or I need to start doing whatever. What do you want? Seriously, what do you want? Does that help you more than anything else? Or does it hurt you more than other things you could do? And it's horrifying and empowering at the same time, because it instantly puts you in full control. If you're honest, if I'm trying to watch my weight, and I'm using this example because it's not made up, right? If I'm trying to watch my weight and I have the choice of eating a bag of chips or eating a couple of chips, I can think of, well, what do I want more than a whole bag of chips? I don't want to have to fast for another couple days, right? Because that's what I'm going to have to do if I eat that whole bag of chips. If I don't want to go to work because I've got this horrendous problem that I am not even sure anyone on this planet can fix, and I've got this whole stack of things to worry about, well, why am I going to work? You're free. You don't have to. But people always say, well, I have to do this and I have to do... You don't have to do jack squat. Someone could chain you to a mattress and electrify your toenails. They still can't force you to do anything. It's still a choice. It's a really painful choice, but it's a choice. So if there's something you want more than getting your toenails electrocuted, you can choose that path. Right? Like if there's something worth enduring that for. And so that's really what it comes down to, is it's an honesty problem. What do you want and why? Think about that and just keep thinking about it. And then it just changes the whole perspective.
And then are we being honest about what we want? Because a lot of times we say, oh yeah, I want this, this, and this, but our actions show we're actually wanting something else instead.
Or we're honest about the cost and benefit.
Right.
We're honest about the time frame of those things. You know, like I could make some really terrible decisions that make me feel great for right now, and I could completely ignore. Did you know? And I don't want to make anyone feel bad, because I know that all of us know people, or we might be people, who struggle with substance abuse in particular. It's not the sin, right? There's a billion different sins, but I just want to talk about this because that's heralded as the thing that no one can control. There's one thing you can't control. It's like, hey, you take heroin one time, you're addicted. I wish heroin were legal. I would inject myself in front of people and then stop using it on a dime. Just show you it can be done. But they've done studies with heroin addicts where if you remind them of the consequences constantly, someone's saying like, oh, you know what this can do with your family? Those people that you love? Guess what happens? They don't do it. It's an honesty problem. It's like poverty. Poverty is not a problem of a lack of resources. It's a problem of bad ideas or a lack of honesty about them. Now, are there places in this world where there aren't resources? Yes, and I'm not talking about that, right? I've been to those places, you may have been too. But even then, there are things that can be done. You know, it broke my heart. I spent 2.5 weeks going all through Zimbabwe. There are starving people everywhere. I was there for malnutrition work with children. And I held thousands of kids in my hands. And the way I see the world, I don't feel any different about those kids than these kids. It's the same. And it broke me in 1,000 pieces. And I also saw people standing around doing nothing about their situation. When you're in a climate where you can literally, and a soil where you can literally throw seeds in the ground and it will grow food. The ideas don't connect, right? So you have to be honest about things. It's really important.
Can I ask you a question? What do you
Sure.
want?
What?
What do you want?
What do I want?
Yeah, what do you want?
I want the kingdom of God to be established and the Lord to return and to have a people prepared for him.
How bad do you want?
How bad do you?
I have given everything I can. I do give everything I can, and I will give everything that I can. And I won't stop until the Lord pulls the plug or he comes.
That proves true.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I have over there for someone that I talked to.
Sure.
So when it comes to doing everything you sincerely believe Christ would do in your place, is this a, because I swear every time I teach my kids something, like you start coming through and I start saying, repeating things you're saying, and that one I was kind of stuck on. Because the only thing I could grasp was according to your current awareness.
Always.
And
Yes.
And so it's not like Jesus Christ was something, he wasn't the same as a child. He was doing different things as a child as he was
Yeah.
when he was on his mission.
Right.
His awareness grew as well.
It did.
But I'm assuming we are not to neglect the increase of our awareness, meaning it can't just always be logical. Not that logic isn't one of the greatest steps, but I know that I can go to the Lord in prayer and receive more awareness about it, and things will shift and change.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, do nothing save you've prayed in the first place, right? So it's wise to always check in, no matter how confident you are. But it's certainly a wise thing to do if you don't have the answer. And then to do what Jesus would do in the places to find the answer, right?
And then on top of that, going back to what you want, I'm assuming it has to align with what Christ would do in your place.
Yeah, so this is an enormous topic to pack it all into something tiny. And to come back to your questions, one of the best ways to develop the same desire as what you think God would want in your place is to do what you want in your place. Does that make sense? Like, oh, you don't think it's a good idea to do what God would do? Okay, go with your plan. See how it goes.
Gotcha.
Because you're going to learn. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but what if it's some tragic thing where it's like a one-time kind of state, there's no recovery from that? Well, if it's that big of a deal, then you should probably go with his will, right? But it doesn't take getting smacked around for too long, if you're honest, to say, yeah, you know what, he knows better than I do, right? It's already a silly place to be to resist that. Like, understand how fundamental that is. Like, do you believe in a God that knows all things and loves you more than you love yourself, or don't you? If you believe that, it doesn't matter how much you're kicking and screaming. You got to get to what he wants you to do. And then John 7:17, if you do, it will build your confidence for the next one. The promoted, how could I say this? The transcendental confidence of whatever God wants is the right thing. Not that particular thing. That doesn't matter, but the big picture. What he says is really the right thing. And so if you're in a place where you're kicking and screaming, well, what do you really want? And be honest about it. And go for it. And you'll see that it's a terrible idea. And then you will value what he values more. Remember, this life, Rob said we should sin. No, that's not what I'm saying, okay? But we are here to grow in our confidence that God knows what he's doing, that he loves us more than we love ourselves, and to understand what he wants, right? And to be that.
It takes playing with reality. You have to act on these things.
Yeah. It's an experiment, right? Yes.
Sort of a technical question and doesn't require a long answer. You can just skip it if it's going to confuse everyone. So between death and resurrection, which would be spirit, prison, and paradise and all, are we still growing? Are we still exposed to people obeying higher laws than we are? And can we still regain?
Prior to resurrection.
Prior to resurrection.
That's a really specific question.
Yeah.
I have to.
I'm near that stage. You know?
I have to take a step back. So before you go and experiment, an actual better idea is to find someone who has and see how it went. You can build up as much of that experience. It's free. We have this thing called Google. You can go and find people who thought it was a good idea and see how they turned out. And then if that doesn't convince you still, hey, kick against that prick as hard as you can and see what happens. Okay, so before resurrection,
No plans.
as soon as I get out of here, before resurrection, the mortal body and the resurrected body and our situation in between, they each have specific qualities. And so can we progress further? Yes, absolutely, right? But, so evidence. Do you know why Abel was martyred? Why was Abel sent to earth when he was? Who was in the spirit world before Abel? Nobody. There's never been a time in creation when God didn't have somebody caretaking that could teach more. That was Abel's mission in life, was to die and be in the spirit world. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but. So, there you go.
Can I just add to the truth?
Sure.
My father was an alcoholic, generations on his side. I didn't get to meet my grandfather. My grandmother was sober. They passed away, my dad passed away 10 years ago. He's come to me. And what you just spoke to is true. He said, Stephen, he says, I'm surprised where mom and dad are at. There's agency, growth, and understanding on the other side, but only you choose it. You didn't tell me where they're at, but absolutely, my friend, so thank you.
Yes. Okay, now that being said, this life has special
More
opportunity
opportunities.
that does not exist anywhere else.
That's why we came.
That's why we came here. Good question.
Why we're excited. Because if it was the same opportunity, what benefit would it be?
Yes.
This question is sort of a minutiae question, and you can ignore it if that seems right. But that verse, Matthew 23, really, my brain just really gets stuck on it because it's saying like the religious practice, the churchy things are essential. There's more to the picture, but like those little things are essential. It's kind of confusing when it's like, well, what should be the source of those churchy things if you don't have a church? Put it simply.
Was man created for the Sabbath or Sabbath for the man? What is a church? It's people who follow Christ. It's a set of people that know something about Jesus. That's what it is. The Book of Mormon says it's a set of followers of Christ, right? And so we get tied up with words. We have to think about what the meaning of the word is. And church is one that could mean 100 different things. But in Matthew 23, you're right, those things are essential. So to your question, where do they come from? How was it in the beginning? It all started with Adam, right? And so how does that work? God governs the earth by sending men and women to earth who know him better. Now you say, but we all come here with a blank slate, because you don't come out as a baby with 2 tablets of stone, right? Oh, and a beard, cool lightning streak gray. That's not the way it works. No, but you do come here with something. But people think that Jesus came here with superpowers. He didn't. He came here, the difference was what he did not have, not what he had. And that difference carries into the servants of God. In Alma 13, greater faith before here, and you come here with a difference. What is that difference?
Lacking.
Yes. How do you know that?
On St. Catherine.
From Alma 13? Did you say a lacking?
Lacking, yes.
Yes, you're right. Well, our Father in heaven told you that. That's a deep mystery. You come with what you lack. And what is that? In Montana, there's a law that you're allowed to trespass on anybody's land as long as you're within a river's, I don't remember, 15-year high water mark or something. That high water mark makes the ground public. We all have a high water mark of the love of God. And you came to this earth with it. And it's what you experienced before, which is why you're not wasting your time with your family. They are learning the love of Christ through you. And it's one of the greatest blessings that you can have. To be that conduit. I can't make a big enough deal out of this. I'm going to write a whole book about it.
Suffering.
It's suffering, yes.
How long is that book?
Me too. I'm the most excited about that, but there's an awful lot that has to come first. So that's when you come here with a greater lack, because your spirit remembers the love of God to a greater intensity, then you can find here, you have 2 choices. You mask it through drugs, sex, alcohol, distraction, anything else you can find.
He who drinketh of the water of this well shall thirst again.
Fantastic, thank you. It's a wonderful reference to his point. Or you become what you cannot find. Or you find what you cannot find. That's, of course, option number 3. But could Adam find what he could not find? Well, yeah, I mean, he went through the angels and reestablished his connection with the Lord, right? But did he find it in people? There's so much about Adam that's not talked about. But you just go down through time. Who did Elijah find in a fellow mortal that gave him any kind of similarity to the high water mark of the love of God that he knew before he was born? No. No. Who did Elisha find? Elijah. And we could keep going. Who did Moses have? No one. Who did Jesus have? No one. He remembered the Father. He did not have the Father. He became Father.
I'm blown away by the truth you speak. If I was the person that you said, I've died 4 times, and 13 NDEs, because I was an ignorant jackass. Because I didn't embrace who I need to be for Christ. I was just so stuck in the ways of the world, carnal, everything that I wanted I took. And for him, I still have to go back to how he loves me, still blows me away. That, there's so much mercy. That's why I was weeping when we talked. It just talks to my, I call it my spiritual DNA. When he called my name, you can't deny who he is. It's a remembrance of everything I knew on that side is here, but I can't put it into mortal words because it's not of this world. But I long for both places to be together, if that makes sense.
Yes, and in the time that we're in when they're not, it's a great blessing because that's how we intermingle. That's the phrase in the Book of Mormon in Nephi's vision. This is how the love of God sheds forth in the heart of men. In what context do you use the verb shed? There's only one. Blood, bleeding. How does the love of God shed itself forth in the heart of men? Through men and women suffering for you in ways you don't deserve. Because they're aware that Jesus suffers for them in ways that they don't deserve. And it's a chain, it's a flow. It's a river of blood. If you really want to get deep in the rabbit hole, we can talk about the river coming out of the end times temple of Jerusalem.
But it can be no other way.
It's a river of blood. And it's a river of blood that dilutes over time because there's water that comes into it through springs. And it gets deeper and deeper. Ezekiel's in the water and it's getting deeper and deeper. It spreads to the world, dilutes in intensity because we have windows of receipt and we're not willing to receive it. It's too much. So
Isn't the purity the same?
no.
Not for some, just
It waters down with every level. Anyway, deep stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We talk about to understand reality. Can we say that reality is things that we cannot see, as Paul says, that we are fighting not flesh and blood?
Yes.
We're fighting things we cannot see.
Yes.
And that is the reality.
That's
The reality is not what we see. Does it make sense?
yes. So part of it is what we see and extends far beyond what we see. And the most important parts are in the part we don't see. But so Paul, he said, "I have not seen the things that God has prepared for those who love him." Did you know what it says right after that? He says he has seen it. He says, "But the Spirit can show you, and it's shown me." But you're meant to see it. It's not like, oh, let's just throw our hands up in the air and after we die, great things will happen. No. Go find those great things. Because if you don't know what they are and what they're worth here, you're never going to do here what you have to do to have them there. Principalities and powers is a huge topic. The problems that we face almost always exceed our awareness. So how can you solve those? And you say, well, go to God. Yes. But unpack that, what does that mean? Use what you have access to, pay attention to, help from above. Does that mean Gabriel's going to come down here with a flaming sword? And maybe. But maybe your next door neighbor is going to come over with a plate of cookies. And it's not, it's situational. Like maybe that's actually the better thing in this case. But especially with the Gabriels, like, because if you die, that's not going to help much with the problem, because you're overwhelmed because of the glory. Maybe cookies is what you need. Right? And this is the thing. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to take any of this seriously until we were some spiritual giant? Wouldn't that be nice? And we could just endlessly walk on this treadmill and say, well, I know I'm on this hamster wheel, but at some point I'm going to be a spiritual giant, and then all this is going to matter, or I'm going to die, and then all this is going to matter. No, it matters right here, right now, because where you are in your life, the people around you, you will never be this way again. If you think about your life, you will see a never-ending list of people where you're in a specific place, time, under certain circumstances, where you can do things for them that no one else can do. And that you yourself can't do 5 years before, 5 years after. It's all like a perfectly tuned clock. Or instrument is probably a better analogy, right? Okay.
What is the principle you were trying to teach us with the blood diluting as it gets
Trying!
I missed it. What is the principle you're teaching us as it dilutes as it gets further and further away?
So, if we don't understand value correctly, as God would, and we don't, how would we know a purer version of His love than what we can currently comprehend? We wouldn't. We wouldn't even notice it. Right? So just to give like a nuts and bolts example, in the New Testament, lots and lots of people reject Jesus. And some people change their minds later, even during his life, right? So he went through and he preached, he zigzagged all across the Holy Land. And some people listened, some people didn't, and to varying degrees. And then he sends out the 70. There are tons of people who are not willing to listen to him, but they'd listen to the 70. Why? Windows of truth. They weren't willing to see the value or understand the message or when it was given in greater purity. For some people, nothing less would have done. Nothing less would have been sufficient. You know, there's a really interesting passage in the New Testament where he's talking about being sent to the lost sheep. A better translation of that would explain that what he's saying is, I haven't come for normal people. I haven't come for advanced people. The advanced people are going to bring this to all of you. I've come for people for whom nothing less will be recognizable as truth. And they'll sort you out. That's what he's saying there. The lost sheep aren't black sheep who do the wrong thing or whatever. It's Alma Sr. who needed Abinadi before he got on the right course. That's what differentiated. God makes a difference. You know, Paul had to be ministered to directly by the Lord to set him straight. So there's this impulse and then a difference that's made. It's an input and then a difference. It's billiard balls colliding. So some people need the diluted water. In the end times, in the New Jerusalem, the final one, there's a city. There's only some people in the city. There's a light in the city. There is a river. There are trees. It says the nations are healed by the leaves of the tree, not the fruit of the tree, because that's something else. There are people who live in the city and they're sustained by that. There are people who eat the fruit and they're sustained by that. There are people who, I don't know what, maybe they smoke the leaves, I don't know. But whatever they do with the leaves, they're healed by them. They're healed by them, which means they are afflicted. And they have to continuously use these leaves to mitigate that continuous problem. That's the watered down. So, yeah. So, God says, I want you to be exactly like me, but if you're not willing to do that, at least do this. But if you're not willing to do that, at least do this. And it just keeps cascading. And you have the joy of the law you're willing to live. All right, I'm willing to answer one more, or respond to one more. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
So I guess the question is, what if I don't know what I believe? There's just such a cacophony of voices and opinions and testimonies and everything else. How do you actually go about and know what is truth?
You learn that you can't. Like, to know is a really, really, really dangerous word. Because nothing is final. Everything you think you know is incorrect or incomplete. But that's kind of like a big lesson to learn. So a place to start would be look at the evidences that you've seen and try to build a model of what you have the greatest confidence in. And then that sounds like it's the hard part, but you actually, I promise, have already done it. Because as a sentient being, you could not move and operate without having already done that. You believe that if you open that handle behind you, the door will open. Okay, or else you wouldn't try. And on and on and on. And so there is this core of things that you absolutely do believe, because it's what you think, feel, and say and do. And you start there, because that's not the hard part actually. You know what the hard part is? Actually living that fully. That's what people don't do. And because they don't do that, they don't find the edges of the beliefs they already have. And because they don't find the edges, they don't know where the holes are. And because they don't know where the holes are, they don't go find what fills up those holes. That's the problem. Like this lady at the well, she thought she knew some things. She lived up to what she thought she knew, and she received more. And some of the receiving more was the knowledge that she had less. Right? All right. I'll stop talking.
Thank you. Thanks.